We are live, Neil. We can leave the introductions to Chris to you.
Okay. Hello and welcome to AXSchat. Today we are truly international. I'm doing this from the back of a cab on my way into Munich. So welcome to AXSchat. Welcome, Chris Lona. Chris is a long-time friend of AXSchat and been joining us every Tuesday. Delighted to have you with us. Bring a different perspective to design and accessibility, so it's really good to have you here. I'm going to drop off shortly because I think my signal's going to go, and I may also get a new record for the world's highest data tariff bill. So thank you for joining us. I will leave you in the capable hands of Deborah and Antonio, and I look forward to joining you on Twitter tomorrow night.
Thank you,
thanks
Neil.
a lot, Neil. I'll go ahead and give you a little background.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chris, let's say, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in accessibility? How you started and what moves you today?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank everyone for having me today. It's a great opportunity, and I'm very appreciative. My journey started with a brain tumor. I was in a 5-year program for architecture, and I started having double vision in my last year, my senior year of architecture. Turned out I had a brain tumor, so they irradiated the brain tumor, but the brain tumor left me with double vision. And then I got a Myasthenia Gravis, autoimmune condition. I believe one of your other guests also mentioned Jessica Germano, I think her name was. Anyway, yep. So here I am, getting spinal taps and radiation, and my colleagues are out interning in architecture. So I'm wondering what my career track is going to be. And so I took 5 years of design training and applied it to graphic design, logos, collateral, the whole bit. And then I started doing multimedia for the web. And I was targeting luxury, and I was at a networking event, and someone was there and saw the work and really liked it. And they said, you know what, this complies with Section 508. And I said, Section what? And then I did a little investigation, and that was sort of the beginning of getting into accessibility, and sort of snowballed from there into creating better accessible digital experiences. So, and lastly, I have double vision. If I lift the eye patch, my other eye works, but I see 2 Antonios and 2 Deborahs. But I got to tell you, in the case of Deborah, it's a wonderful thing. Back to you.
Chris, I have a question. Since you lifted your eye patch off, because when I see you, you always wear the patch on the same eye. Do you ever go back and forth between the different eyes? I'm just curious.
Yes, I do, depending on the context.
Okay.
And longer distance, farther away is better with my right eye, and it varies. There's a fatigue level with myasthenia gravis, like any autoimmune condition. And so if one eye gets tired, I'll switch. And I get some funny looks when I'm driving, though, I'll tell you that much.
I bet. It's very interesting. And it's very interesting that once again, as your life unfolded, it made it very clear and apparent the direction that you should go in. If you're not going to be able to be a traditional architect, why can't you be an architect of a different way and help a lot of other people that are impacted at the same time? So that's a pretty powerful story.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. That's exactly right. It's
Chris, in terms of technology in your home and the computer that you are using, do you have any techniques or any devices that facilitate your life, the way how you interact?
In terms of assistive technology?
Yes, yes, or sometimes not just assistive technology. Is there any sometimes normal resources that are already available on the computer that everybody has access to, that you are using in order to benefit your experience?
Yes, I use a lot of the standard Adobe suite programs. Hopefully that answers your question. I use Macintosh Mini for my design work. I actually do use a screen reader from time to time to sort of augment my experience online. So sometimes I'll even look at captions. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, let me take his question a little bit further. So you say that you have eye fatigue, for example, and as somebody over a certain age, I have what's called dry eyes, and so I can really tell when I'm on my computer too long, and everything I do is technology, the same as you, Chris, and same as Antonio and Neil. And so there's some days that my eyes hurt so bad that I just have to lay down, and I take medicine for it, but it's sometimes I'll give you an example. The other day I went to the IAAP strategy meeting, and there was a lot of my really amazing friends there, and I'm in there. It's about 8:30 at night, and my eyes hurt me so bad that all I wanted to do was just go back to the hotel and lay down because my eyes hurt so bad, and they were really bloodshot and everything. And it's, in some ways, it feels small compared to other things, but when you're in pain, you're in pain. So are there things that you do to try to minimize the, because it must be harder for you, Chris, because you're seeing double, you're moving from eye to eye, things that can, that you do to try to minimize the, the exhaustion on your eyes and things like that?
Yes, certain techniques. Mostly it's not working too hard, and resting when rest seems applicable. Sometimes it's not possible, right. Like in the case when you're at a convention or something, you're kind of, maybe committed to being there, and you can't really address all of the issues that are happening to you like at a convention. But I do take time out, and pretty good at self-regulating so that things don't get too extreme. Right.
And I find that when I fly and I'm in dry conditions, it gets worse, of course. And I'm sure it's the same thing with you. It's always interesting that, anything, whether you have walked the walk you've walked, or you're just, walking the walk I'm walking, or all of us, I think taking the tips that we're learning to manage our health, it's always good to share these tips. But let's talk more about your work. And so I have known about your work and worked with you and actually endorsed your work for many years. You and I have known each other many, many years, and I was really glad when you started becoming a regular participant on AXSchat. And I know and admire that you have a different way of looking at the world. Sometimes it's very interesting, your perspective, and I know you're all about access for all. So tell us more about the work you do. And I know we're not making this a commercial, but the reason why I want to really dig in a little bit more into the work you do is because you're taking this from a different direction than many other people are taking, which is why I've always been fascinated by you.
Thanks, Deborah, very much. Sure, I won't make it into a commercial. I'll just describe sort of the nuts and bolts. When I started investigating web accessibility and digital accessibility, I sort of noticed some things about it that I would like to improve. So I took it upon myself to think about it a little bit. I came to the conclusion that I wanted to more align with the ADA, where access for people with disabilities and others is integrated, built in from the ground up. And I thought, well, I can see if I can do that with my web design. And so I started investigating ways to include human narration, integrated captions, one-touch key controls, and a combination of media for the cognitively impaired. So for the visually impaired, there's human narration. And for the auditorially impaired, there's integrated captions. For the physically impaired, someone who can't use a mouse, or prefers to use the keyboard, there's one key press to navigate anywhere on the site. And for the cognitively challenged, like with ADD or dyslexia or any other host of invisible disabilities, such as they may be, there's a combination of media and choices. So if you want to see, if you're dyslexic and you're having trouble with the text, there's the audio to complement that. And the text is optional. You can close it or turn it off or show it. So I just thought that the ADA was a good model to emulate, because we've had 25, 26 years of it now, and it seems like a good way to go. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. It does. Let me turn it over to Antonio. I know he has a question.
No, the way we use social networks to communicate. We have devices all over us. Sometimes trying to distract us, and you have quite a strong passion to communicate for online communication. So when you are in your act of communicating, so from all the networks, which of them is the one that you are able to see that you get more engagement, and you feel that you get more rewarded by the way how the communication flows?
In terms of social media, I guess I would have to say Twitter. And of course, my favorite chat is AXSchat. There's a commercial for you. Anyway,
thank you. We'll take it.
Yeah, I do have to say Twitter. I mean, in terms of accessibility, that's another issue. I think that a lot of the information on the web is treated the same in terms of accessibility, where it's not necessarily so. And also there are challenges with different types of information in terms of making them accessible. One of the biggest challenge with making information accessible is with the social media paradigm. So, I focus on making enduring information more accessible, but that's not how social media works. It's interactive, real time, and there's a real challenge with making that accessible. So yeah, Antonio, hopefully that answers your question. My favorite social media platform is Twitter.
But from your perspective, how can this networks can improve the way how they how they develop? Could be their APIs, how they facilitate the connectivity with other devices in order to become more accessible and easy to consume for people who might have different disabilities.
I think the key is stepping back from technology for a moment and looking at access from a 360, 30,000 foot view, and integrating that study, that analysis, with the way and the desires real everyday people want to interact with whatever they're interacting with, and moving forward from there. Like I said, social media or interactive information is very different from, say, a trip to the Caribbean. And so I think that's the first place to start, is sort of with the humanity of the web. What is the humanity of the web? What do everyday people want to see, do, interact with? What do they want their experiences to be like? And then moving forward from there. Thankfully, there are already some standards in place that help us jump forward from there. There's WCAG and Section 508, CVAA. Now even the ACA has some commentary, some regulations around web accessibility. So I think from a humanist side, that we need to think about how everyday people are going to, how their experiences are going to be the best they can possibly be.
And so, Christopher, I know this is something that you really talk about a lot. And I know sometimes you get frustrated on AXSchat and others about, you know, us here in the United States always looking at this from a compliance lens. And I believe that we agree, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, even the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These are all important conventions and laws, and we have all this litigation going on in the United States. I saw an article about, it was in August, that said that lawsuits are up 63% because of web accessibility issues. And we expect, and this came from a law firm, and we expect those numbers to rise dramatically. And that does not take into effect the lawsuits and the EEOC complaints and things that are happening for not including people with disabilities in the workforce, or not, hiring and retaining people with disabilities, or people as they acquire disabilities in the workforce. But so in the United States, of course, we're looking at this from legal, legislative, litigation, and compliance. But I've always been intrigued with your work because you consider those things, but you've always tried to look at it more broadly. And would it be fair for me to say more of universally designed, the client experience or the individual experience on the internet?
Yes, that's fair to say, and I think that's a great assessment. Certainly, you know, when I make my kids clean their room, they don't do as good a job. But if they take it upon themselves to to clean their room, somehow they do a better job. So I think the reason I mention that is because I think it applies to compliance. I mean, if the laws are written in such a way that, you know, the organization or the government can gain a return on investment, I mean, that is a powerful motivator versus to say, you know, you have to do whatever. And so I think that part of my goal with the accessibility work that I do is to, first of all, create better accessible digital experiences that not only create a better experience for the visitor, but also, I don't want to say compliance, because you said, you know, there's the whole legal issue, but align more fully with accessibility regulations. And I do happen to know from two sources at the U.S. Access Board that our work is Section 508 compliant. And so I think that coming at compliance from an incentive point of view, wherever possible, is going to be more effective than sort of a punishment sort of approach. Does that answer your question, Deborah?
It does. And you know, we've actually talked about this question before. I remember when we had Susanna from FunkNew on here, and she got into I adore her, and she got into a conversation with me about why does the U.S. always litigate, and I wound up writing a blog about that on Huffington Post. And one thing that I find, I'm not saying that all other countries should follow the way the U.S. does it, because God bless us, we complicate things. But the reality is, because of the efforts that were made with our legislation, with our litigation, and because so many, you know, we're global, the world is global, and so businesses are global. So as these multinationals try to make it work here in the United States, we're actually seeing positive activities with accessibility happening all over the world. I know that Antonio has a comment, so I'm going to turn it over to him real quick.
Because in reference to that, what we see is, in Scandinavian countries, there's a strong area of even from government, where government sometimes drives the digital agenda. That is then is going to be, and then business end up following the digital agenda that comes from government. So there's a very strong part of public policy that comes to be available, and it's quite easy for sometimes for people to get instructions even from government sides in order to help them with their efforts. Is that something now in relation to the United States? Is that something that is more driven for the private sector, where the representation or the act of having a sort of a public entity that somehow could support all those efforts is absent? What clarifications can you provide me in relation to that?
Boy, that's a great question. You know, I really don't have the answer to that. I do think that I have looked at what UK.gov and lots of government sites, and think that there's potential there for sort of the sort of work we do. Not for every section of the site, but I do think that, you know, government can, like you say, affect the private sector. But I'd like to see more, like I said, sort of 360, 30,000 foot view of accessibility, because what I see in terms of sort of best practices, and I don't want to get on Neil's naughty step here, but I'd like to see more integration of digital access. I mean, for governments and organizations, private sector, public sector, it's I perceive accessibility as kind of being the same for them, for their challenges in terms of sort of this sort of patchwork accessibility effect. I mean, it's almost as if accessibility is siloed. I mean, you've got one solution for the visually impaired, completely separate, non-integrated solution for the auditorily impaired, you know, and then there's not really any consistency with how the physically impaired access a site. And again, the cognitively impaired, there's no real concrete recommendations, even with WCAG. So I'd like to see those four elements and more sort of come together, you know, not being so much us and them, but more becoming us, if that makes any sense. That may be a convoluted and not really answer your question exactly, but those are kind of my thoughts based on what you asked me. So hopefully that helps.
Because when we interview Malin from the Norwegian government, she works for an authority within government who have the responsibility to guarantee that the websites from business and government are accessible, and they have the capacity to enforce that, and even to go to business and tell them no, and at some stage, you know, ask them to pay or for the fact that their sites are not accessible, and they never did that. They also always try to engage with the organizations to allow them to change, and they try to facilitate them change when sometimes they realize that they don't have enough resources for that change. So you know, I know it's a different country, you know, and the resources on every country are completely different, but it's just a way of looking at things from a society who has a different government structure and a different impact in government in terms of regulation.
Right. I think the key again there is going to be what kind of an incentive can the government offer organizations versus saying, you know, we're going to punish you if you don't. So I think, again, you know, if there's some, I don't want to say carrot on a stick, but true motivation is going to beget true solutions, I think.
Well, and I would say, and maybe I have my U.S. hat firmly on my head, but I don't think that's the answer. I do not think, and I just don't think government is going to be the answer for us finally having full access. I think that the economics are going to drive it. I was talking to a woman the other day, and I was talking about employment. And this woman has a child with Down syndrome. And she said, you know what we need to do, Deborah? We need to have the United States government create a rule, a law that says that all businesses, all corporations have to hire a certain number of people with intellectual disabilities in their workforce. And she said that will finally solve the employment problems we have for people with intellectual disabilities in the United States. What do you think of that? And I said, I think it's a terrible idea. She was shocked. Why? I said, because we have so many laws on our books right now.
Right.
There are laws all over the world that say websites have to be accessible. You have to hire a certain number of people. You have to do this. You have to do that. Government can try to incentivize, companies to do this. They have tried to incentivize. Countries all over the world have tried to incentivize this. The very most progress that we've seen, excuse my bad English, I think the progress that we see that is more sustainable is when a corporation really embraces, and let's do a shout out for a couple of good brands. TD Bank is an amazing corporation in Canada, but they're an international corporation. Barclays is another one. They're located in the United Kingdom, but they have offices all over the world. These two, coincidentally, banks, both have made a lot of efforts to make sure their products, their services, their solutions are fully accessible to their employees and to their clients. Well, don't think that the other banks that I didn't mention, many of them in the US, but also all over the world, don't notice that TD Bank and Barclays banks keep getting these accolades. So I'm not convinced that, the government definitely has a place to play, but I think economics need to play. And Chris, as an individual with a disability yourself, as I also have some visible disabilities, but I have family members, my daughter, my parents, my nephews. I have a lot of disabilities in my family. I think it is also to the consumers to say, I am going to bank with Barclays Bank. I'm going to bank with TD Bank because they are making sure that we are fully included and they're making accessibility a priority. I think that we have to let economics run this, not just expect our government to put more laws on the books and incentivize us to do the right thing. We've got to let some of the economics drive it as too. And so when I talk to large crowds of people, I will say, if you are a person with a disability, or you have a family member impacted by disabilities, or you just care about this and you are not voting with your wallet and your pocketbook, then and not only voting and making changes to those establishments, but telling them why you're doing it, blogging about it, putting it out on Twitter, but also the ones that you're leaving, you're telling them why you're leaving too. Society can make great changes by having our voices heard. So sorry to go off on a tangent, but I really believe that it is not just for the government to fix this. It's not just for W3C to fix this. This is not, we all have to fix this. And I think that's one reason why we wanted you on the show today, was because you looked at it and you said, okay, I don't think this is just a compliance issue. I don't think this is just a legislative issue. I think that we actually could get very creative and innovative with digital design and make sure that we're all engaged, we're all in having very good customer experience, client experience, right? That's what you've always done. You've been innovative with it.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. And I totally agree with you. I should probably clarify that I don't think that government incentivizing private organizations is the only solution. I think if they did more of it, it might help. But I do think that sort of in our work, you mentioned, well-known organizations providing better accessibility as a precedent for others to follow. And we're just finishing 2 projects for a national public-private partnership related to tourism and travel here in the United States. Their mission is to encourage travel from international destinations to the United States. And we've just done 2 projects, and the feedback, thank you, Deborah, of course, has been wonderful. And so those innovative precedents that people can see, organizations, government, everyday people, anyone can advance our cause, because you're trying to accommodate people, but sometimes people don't know what they want, and sometimes people don't know what they need. So if you show them a solution and that makes them go wow, gives them that wow moment, it resonates with them. And if it resonates with everyday people, it should resonate with organizations, corporations, and government. Say, look, this is working and people love it. How can we use it? And then I would say, well, if you integrate access, you're going to also save money. And then so they might take a look at that as well. So there are many aspects of the problem, or I'd rather say there are many aspects of the solution. Let me put it that way.
Right, right. It's multidimensional for sure. So, and Chris, one thing that I see happening over and over again, when I had my company Tech Access, and this is what we did for a living, it was very discouraging to me sometimes, because we would work with these very large brands. We would help them, blend the accessibility into their policies and procedures and get their website looking really good, very accessible. And then you go back 6 months later and they're totally inaccessible again. How do we help these, organizations stay accessible? I mean, getting accessible is very important, but staying accessible, I think, is really critical. And how have you taken, I know you're taking sort of a different direction than a lot of designers. How do we do that? How do you do that? What's the magic answer?
I think part of the answer is culture. I don't think it's a one-time thing. I think that mindset and the paradigm has to be integrated into the culture, from not just the website, but hiring people with disabilities, and just pervasive and permeate the culture. That way, things moving forward come out of that mission and vision and culture of the organization. That's the short answer. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think we debated this a few times on this chat with previous guests. Is currently, in the United States, it's quite difficult for a person with a disability to get into a job without losing rights. So, what type of work can be done in order to trying to find a way to evangelize or to influence the right people to change things in that area?
Oh, I think it's a matter of perspective. I recently hired a intern with cerebral palsy, and I can't tell you how much I've learned from him. It's such a microcosm of kind of what we're talking about. I do think it's all about perspective and understanding. Wear an eye patch for a day and see how what that's like. And then, provide the tools and access, environment, culture that they need to succeed. And also, of course, provide clear expectations of what, you're going to expect of them. And, have a conversation. I think, person to person, face to face conversations about the issues affecting whatever context you're in are only going to help your cause and your efforts.
True. Go ahead, Antonio.
Okay, so today we have you have mentioned to me in the past some of the work that you did with national parks. And today we see so much technology coming to one with Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality. We see all these technologies, and it's almost if we browse on the web, it's quite of a noisy world. Everybody's talking about these three topics. It's impossible to get away from them. There was a recent interview to Wired magazine with President Obama, where he actually talks about all this new technology and what government might think in doing with it. So, I don't know if you have time to study and look at this, but how do you see some of the work that you are doing at the moment to somehow being transported to these new technologies and opportunities that might came with technology?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Antonio. I think, again, that any kind of where you can integrate is probably better. Anytime you can integrate accessibility, if we're talking specifically about accessibility, or better experience overall, that it will improve the visitor's experience. Rama Girawa was on back in May, was on AXSchat, and he said that, and I love this, he said, users use, consumers consume, but people live. And so I think if you can, identify that, sort of the essence of what he said, and apply it to whatever technology you're developing or designing for people, that the better off it will be. So virtual reality, how can that be made more accessible? Kiosks are a great one. Are they too high? Are they too low? Are they interactive? Do they, how do they respond to the weather? There's so many variables, for just kiosks. There's so many variables in any one technology that, again, I think it's important to look at the overall view of not just the technology itself, but how people are going to, what their experiences with it are going to be like. He also mentioned that technology should be designed for people, and that people shouldn't serve technology, and I totally agree with that. That was one of my favorite AXSchat interviews was with Rama from the Helen Hamlin Center. So shout out for them.
I agree. That was an amazing interview. I agree.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question, Antonio. I think that any new technology or even existing technologies, because if we look at existing technologies, is the accessibility perfect? Well, of course not. Sometimes maybe technology moves too fast for us to properly integrate humane accessibility. There are examples and precedents that can inform new technology. So it's quite a rich tapestry of elements coming together. Hopefully that answers your question.
First, I think it's also fair to say that is important that when we develop technology today, it's important to work with diverse teams to have different perspectives. We know that developers, data scientists, they only own a small piece of the knowledge. So when we are designing to a multiplicity of users, it's important to bring the different angles, and it's important that technology teams have the chance to using the design thinking methodologies to have input from people from the most diverse aspects from life and society.
So absolutely, yeah, and that kind of gets back to my comment about hiring people with disabilities. If you're an employer and you don't really have any perspective of what it's like to be disabled, you perhaps don't have the full picture. And so, as we talked about a little bit earlier with the employment side of things, gaining a perspective of someone who is disabled and their needs can better inform their role in an organization as an employee, and also help the employer and the organization overall. So I think that applies to the technology side too. The more perspectives and knowledge and education you can get together, the better the results will be. So that's just sort of my 2 cents on the topic.
That's a great point, though. And one thing that and I know that we're out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and summarize everything and close up the chat. But I think that's really a good point, because one thing I found is that often when I was training technologists on accessibility and, customer experience, when I would bring in technologists that had visible disabilities. I remember this gentleman I worked with, we always called him Mr. Jaws because he was one of the best screen reader users I'd ever seen, and he would sort of mess with me and the audience in that he could listen to his screen reader so fast that it was incomprehensible to me. And I remember one time in a class, he was listening to it, and in my ear, it sounded like gibberish. And I'm like, John, turn it down, make it slower. And so he slowed it down some, and he's like, and then it still sounded like gibberish. And I'm like, John, I still can't understand it. And he's like, do I need to slow it down more for you guys? And so it was really powerful because it showed that he was so much stronger at this technology than the rest of us were. And the technologists that were in training, they got so much value out of watching him, use their internet or not use their their website. And I have always thought that something that should come out of accessibility, which is one reason why I wrote about it, is employment, because I believe that technology, that you should be hiring people with disabilities anyway, but I think there's a real opportunity to hire technologists with different disabilities, invisible and visible ones, to really make sure that you're experiencing, what the customers need. And I'll give you an example with Disney. I'll do another brand name. One thing that I love about Disney beyond, there's a lot of things I like about Disney, but Disney hires cast members that look like their guests. So they hire people that speak different languages. They hire people with disabilities. They hire people with different ethnic backgrounds. They hire people with different religions because they want their cast, they don't call them employees, their cast members, to look like their customers. Nope, not their customers, their guests, so that everyone can have the magical experience. It seems like we need to take that and apply it to what we're doing with design. And I perceive, Christopher, that's partially what you're doing. So let me give you, let us give you time to, make a final comment before we close, but you've been a very interesting guest, which I knew you would be. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deborah and Antonio. I appreciate the opportunity for being here today very much. As you know, I'm a fervent supporter of AXSchat every week. And I'd just like to close with sort of a reflection on accessibility overall. I think that it's important at the end of the day to remember that the experiences of everyday people, those with disabilities, those without, in the digital space, in the physical world, is the most important thing. Understanding their perspectives, understanding and listening to their stories to inform how we make their experiences better. So we're doing our darndest, our best to always create better, accessible digital experiences for everyday people. And with that, I'll send it back to you.
Well, we really, really appreciate you being on today, Christopher. I find that you're very innovative and very creative, very passionate about this topic. We are so grateful that you are part of the AXSchat community. We sometimes are surprised at the success of AXSchat. It's very grateful, though, but we couldn't have done it without members like you that are there every single week, are answering the question, taking the time to buffer your answers or schedule your answers or do it live. It can be intense, AXSchat, but we couldn't do it if we didn't have, community members and community leaders like you. So we're very grateful for you. So we're looking forward to the chat tomorrow, Christopher, and we will go ahead and close the interview for now. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope I didn't end up on Neil's naughty step.
Yeah, we all end up there sometimes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very
Goodbye.
much.
Goodbye.